Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Rifleman. It is Friday morning. Well, actually, it's Friday afternoon. It's my last day of vacation. I've had a chance to make a couple of other videos this week, none of which were really gun-related, but the topic of this video is something I've been meaning to get to for a while. Obviously, everyone is talking about the P320, and more specifically, the M17 and the M18 pistols in U.S. military service. Everyone who's watching this is aware of the tragic occurrence a couple of weeks ago where an airman lost his life. You're probably also aware that an arrest has been made for making false statements and obstructing justice and involuntary manslaughter, I think. And so a lot of people, this has been a hot topic of conversation for a couple of years at this point, and it keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And a lot of people made a lot of maybe premature videos a few weeks ago. I held off. After the Air Force arrested an airman, a lot of people have been backpedaling. I'm not going to jump to conclusions on that either. I have spent enough time in the military to know that the Department of Defense is not averse to throwing junior enlisted personnel under the bus when it becomes convenient to do so. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions at all. I want to start this video by saying I don't have any experience with the P320. I was out of the military long before the M17 and M18 were adopted. The standard pistol, when I was in, and I was an armorer, I had plenty of these in my arms room. I'm very familiar with the system. I've serviced these and maintained these, and I thought a great deal of the Beretta 92FS, which was adopted by the U.S. military as the M9, and I thought this was a great pistol. I know that a lot of veterans, particularly those who were issued M9s that had been in very sandy, dusty, abrasive combat conditions for deployment after deployment after deployment after deployment, and which were just plumb worn out. I know a lot of those people have a much different opinion of the M9 than I do, and I absolutely agree that those pistols that were worn out and were causing problems to the people who were having to use them in combat and stake their survival on the pistol, those should have been pulled out of service. I don't think the M9 is infallible, but I can tell you from experience that when an M9 pistol, even one that's in well-used condition like this one, is in good working order, I still believe it's one of the finest combat handguns that's ever been fielded. It's probably my favorite. I have a couple others that are near and dear to my heart, but I think the M9, to me, is the greatest combat pistol of the last, 30 or 40 years anyway. So in 2016, the DoD announced that they were going to have the XM17 XM18 modular handgun system trials, which turned out probably not really to be trials, but rather just a selection process. And there was no phase 2 testing conducted, or at the very least, we can say that any phase 2 testing that was conducted was minimal at best, and really didn't rise to the standards of military acceptance testing that's set forth in DoD procedures. So we ended up with the P320 as the XM17 M17 and also the compact version as the XM18. From my perspective, it really looks, especially since it was called the Modular Handgun System Trials, and the only well-known modular handgun that existed at the time was the P320, which was a conversion of a hammer-fired pistol, which was apparently a pretty good pistol, the P250. I don't have any experience with that pistol either, but I've never heard of any problems with the P250. But it was introduced at a time when everybody was going to polymer-framed, striker-fired pistols, and polymer-framed, hammer-fired, double-action-only pistols were really not in vogue. It wasn't what people wanted. So SIG converted the P250 to the P320, but there's problems of architecture and geometry. There are differences between hammer-fired pistols and striker-fired pistols that are quite significant, and I'm not going to get into that in great detail, but the idea of taking a hammer-fired pistol and just changing a bunch of parts out and redesigning a couple of things and selling it as a striker-fired pistol seems, to me, like a recipe for disaster. And I don't know what's wrong with the P320. A lot of people argue that there's nothing wrong with the P320, but I believe in the old axiom that where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's a lot of smoke around the P320. And I haven't tested it, and I probably will never own a P320. If I could get one that was M17 or M18 marked in the proper flat desert earth with the thumb safety and everything, and I could get it for practically nothing, I might buy it just to complement my M9, and I'll talk about this a little bit. This is a pretty accurate representation of a military M9. I would probably take a P320 just to have a representative example of the M17 or M18 in my collection, but I can tell you I'm not going to carry it, and I wouldn't do a lot of shooting with it, and I would never chamber around until I was at the range and had it pointed downrange. There have been a relatively small percentage of problems with the P320. If you have one and you love it and you've used it extensively and it's been perfectly reliable, don't take this video the wrong way. I am not disparaging the P320. My intention with this video, because so many others have talked about the problems with the P320, and they've bashed on the P320, they've bashed on SIG Sauer, or SigArms, I guess it is nowadays. They've criticized SigArms leadership, and I think there's a lot of legitimate criticism that can be laid at the feet of SigArms leadership. Not going to go into that. Again, it's been done a million times over by other people. And they've speculated on whether or not SigArms is going to be able to survive this debacle. The Air Force has already sidelined the P320. I just saw a caption this morning. I didn't watch the video, or maybe it was a headline for an article. Apparently, ICE has dumped the P320 in favor of a Glock model. I don't really know. I didn't look into it too closely. I know the federal government has a lot of money invested in the P320 in general, and the M17 and M18 specifically, but I don't think it's going to last in military service. I don't see how it possibly could at this point. With all of the incidents and all of the issues and all of the public opinion against the P320 right now, I don't think that they're going to be able to keep the M17 and M18 and the civilian law enforcement administrations that are using civilian versions of the P320. I don't see how they're going to, in good conscience, continue to use P320-based pistols. So rather than trashing the P320 or trashing SigArms and its leadership, I wanted to take a little bit more positive outlook on what might have been. I have 3 other pistols here on the table in addition to the M9. And by the way, you can see they all have the slides locked open. I'm going to be publishing this in 4K. You can see there's empty magazines in here. I'm not going to go through the pantomime of showing you that all these pistols are safe. Actually, this one doesn't have the slide locked open, but it does now, and you can see that it's locked open automatically. There's no ammunition in the magazine, and there's no ammunition in the immediate vicinity. So these pistols are all safe. I think there were 8 competitors all told. I think some of them weren't really serious submissions. There was something from STI, I think, Detonics. I think that was a 2011. There was something from Sphinx, which basically was a CZ75. CZ themselves submitted the P07 and the P09, both of which are hammer fired. I think the requirements for this contract were that they be striker fired pistols. So I don't think any of those were really serious submissions. I think all of those companies just submitted on the off chance maybe they would win. And Detonics, for instance, I don't know how on earth they would have even fulfilled a military contract. They probably would have had to have gone to a larger manufacturer to get most of the manufacturing done. Then, of course, there was the P320, which I don't have here. And again, I'm not looking to buy one. Then there was the one pistol that's missing from this table was FN's FNS. I think that was a pretty serious submission. Unfortunately, the FNS is not available anymore. It's been replaced with the FN509. There's a version of the FN509 which is fairly close in specifications to what was submitted to the MHS system trials, but it is significantly more expensive than these other 3 pistols that we're going to look at today. I don't know that FN would have been able to price match the ultimate winner. So what I have assembled here, I originally only had 2 of them. Of course, there's the Glock 19X. This needs no introduction. It's a very, very well-known pistol. I think Glock, when they brought this out, minus the manual safety, because Gaston Glock was dead set against manual safeties unless it was going to earn him a giant military contract. This is pretty much exactly what was submitted to the trials. And I think when they sold this on the civilian market, they only originally intended to sell a limited run of these, I think maybe 10,000 pistols, but there was such a phenomenal demand. They sold, I think, 100,000 Glock 19Xs in the first year. So the limited edition thing went out the window. It's still for sale. I think the current Glock 19X is cut for an optics mount. So I don't know if they're still making this one. I bought this right after the M17 and M18 were adopted by the U.S. military. As a matter of fact, I drove to a shop that I knew had M17s and M18s in stock. And I drove up there with the intention of buying, handling both of them and then deciding whether I wanted an M17 or an M18 to complement my M9. And that was before there was nearly so much controversy surrounding the P320. And I ended up handling both of those pistols and just not really feeling very right about them. I'm not saying I had some sort of premonition. I just didn't really care for them all that much. And the Glock 19X was in such hot demand. It was very hard to find one of these in stock. The same shop I went to had a Glock 19X in stock for around the same price as an M17 or an M18. And I handled this and I said, I know these are hard to come by at that point in time. I'm just going to buy this. And I've never really regretted that decision. I have here also the Beretta APX. This is a gun which didn't really appeal to me, but I found it super cheap. This was a Brazilian, an unissued Brazilian law enforcement trade-in. I don't think it ever actually made it to Brazil. I think these were overruns. They were imported by Beretta USA. They have Beretta USA import marks on here, which would normally have appeared over on this side of the slide, but this actually has Brazilian agency markings on it. And it came with the black APX A0 grip frame. This is a modular handgun, just like the P320. As a matter of fact, I think Beretta is the only company that really came correct to the trials. They designed a brand new pistol that conformed to all the specifications in the modular handgun system contract, and they were shot down mostly because my understanding is they were shot down mostly because the pistol was too new. You know, the military was basically asking for a pistol that didn't exist. Beretta, when they couldn't railroad their M9 through congressional hearings, when they couldn't get their M9A3 or M9A4 adopted, Beretta, who has always been very staunch traditionalists, they're the world's oldest gun manufacturer, and they have generally focused on older technology and classic designs. They went back to the drawing board. They threw convention completely out the window and designed the Beretta APX. And in my testing, this pistol has outperformed any other pistol I've ever used, particularly in using substandard ammo. I have a supply of 1970s, I think, manufactured Pakistan Ordnance Factory 2Z submachine gun ammo, 9mm NATO submachine gun ammo, which has the hardest primers I've ever seen in my life. No other pistol I have tested that ammo in could even reliably ignite the ammo. I think maybe my CZ75 had something close to a 50% ignition rate on that Pakistani submachine gun ammo. This pistol, out of 100 rounds, had either a 92 or a 93% ignition rate. And when the primers actually went off, the pistol functioned absolutely perfectly. This is the most brutal pistol I've ever seen. It was designed as a 40 Smith & Wesson, as is the case with the next pistol that we're going to look at. But this is the most soldier-proof, brutally constructed, overbuilt pistol I have had the pleasure of owning and even the opportunity of using. We pay a lot of lip service to H&K, for instance. My dad has a USP. That's a really massively overbuilt gun, very, very strong and very, very reliable. And I personally, although the APX has not gotten the attention that it deserves, I think is more overbuilt than even the H&K USP. This is just a beast. And I think the most soldier-proof pistol on the table here. And, you know, I said earlier that we were looking at what could have been. Any of these pistols, with the exception of the M9, although it could be briefly pulled back into service while the DoD figures out what it's going to do, all of these pistols are not only what could have been, but what may still be. The second pistol I want to take a look at is this one. This is a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0. This is not exactly what was submitted to the trials. Actually, none of these are, because all of them had manual safeties included. You can still get the Beretta APX, or you can retrofit your APX with the type of manual safety that was used in the trials. The Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 comes with or without a manual safety. This one does not have a manual safety. It has the little plastic plugs installed here that fill that in, although I think you can get a manual safety and retrofit it into the pistol. The M&P that was submitted to the trials this is a 4¼ inch barrel. I think it had a 4.5 inch barrel, so it was slightly longer. The whole thing was FDE. But other than the manual safety and the length of the slide and the color, this is exactly what was submitted to the trials. And I'm always late to the game. I'm a fairly recent convert to the Smith & Wesson M&P. As I am with the Beretta APX, I've always been kind of a Glock guy, and I still love Glock. But the M&P really outclasses anything else on the table here. The trigger, and this has the older hinge trigger. The new trigger that's coming in the 2.0s today is supposedly better yet than this trigger, but this trigger is fantastic compared to either the APX or the Glock 19X. When I first saw the stories about this modular handgun system program in 2016, I read several articles, some of which I just looked them up again about a week ago. You can find them online. There were a couple of articles in defense publications about the upcoming trials and about this pistol in particular. I thought that this was the shoe-in product that was going to win the trials, which was going to be the M17 or M18 pistol eventually, because this was a collaborative project between two of the heaviest hitters in the defense market. Obviously, Smith & Wesson was already making an M&P pistol. It was slightly different than the 2.0. It had a polymer frame like all of these other polymer frame pistols, but the polymer frame that it used was actually a stainless steel chassis that was over-molded with polymer. Like the APX, it was designed as a 40 Smith & Wesson, so it's quite a bit overbuilt in comparison to, say, a Glock 19. Very heavy slide. The barrel is quite heavy because this is essentially a 40 Smith & Wesson barrel that is chambered in 9mm, so you have heavy barrel walls. It has interchangeable back straps. Incidentally, so does the Beretta APX. And the Glock kind of has interchangeable back straps. It has attachments that you can put onto the back strap that change the configuration of the pistol. In all three cases here, the Smith & Wesson M&P comes with 4 interchangeable back straps. There's small, medium, medium/large, and large. I have the medium insert on here. The Beretta APX comes with 3 inserts, small, medium, large. I have the medium on there. And the Glock 19X comes with, you can either shoot it with no backstrap add-on at all, or you can use the medium-sized one, or there's a large one. And I, again, have the medium one on here. I'm a pretty big guy, but I don't have huge hands. I have very average-sized hands. I take a size large work glove normally, so the medium inserts on all 3 of these pistols fit me perfectly. And the M&P was already very successful, an excellent service pistol. But in preparation for the modular handgun system trials, Smith & Wesson partnered with one of the heaviest hitters in the defense industry, and that was General Dynamics. General Dynamics is the 3rd largest defense contractor in the United States. It might be the 3rd largest defense contractor in the world. They make everything from, Gatling guns to nuclear submarines, tanks, you name it, everything in between. But General Dynamics partnered with Smith & Wesson to improve the M&P, and they were going to use their combined expertise on bidding government contracts to try to get this pistol accepted as the military's new service pistol. And I just naturally assumed with Smith & Wesson, who was huge going back to the late 19th century. I mean, Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson were captains of American industry long before General Dynamics was even an idea. And again, General Dynamics, who is, whenever, wherever defense contractors gather together, General Dynamics is always the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I just naturally assumed that this was going to be the next service pistol. And from what I've seen of this example, I think it would have made an excellent choice. I've never heard of Smith Wesson M&Ps shooting their owners or going off inside of holsters. Likewise with the Beretta APX. Lastly, we come to the Glock 19X. And as most of you know, the Glock 19X was the other submission in the down select of two pistols at the end of the, I hate to say trials, but at the end of the selection process, there were two pistols that had risen to the top. The SIG P320, obviously, and the Glock 19X. I can't really say much about the Glock 19X that hasn't been said a million times elsewhere. Usually when X appears in a model name, it means experimental. I think 19X is an homage to the XM17 and XM18 trials. Likewise, I believe the APX, the X in that was for automatic pistol, experimental. The Glock 19X is what any Glock 19, and that's really what it is. It does have a longer grip frame with a higher magazine capacity, but for all intents and purposes, this is like a Gen 4.5 version of the Glock 19. And the Glock 19 is undoubtedly, with the exception of the Glock 17, the most used and issued combat pistol worldwide today and for the last couple of decades, maybe. There's nothing I can say about the Glock 19 or specifically the Glock 19X that you don't already know, probably. This would have been an excellent, excellent selection, but it doesn't really conform to the modularity requirements set forth in this contract. The Glock 19 is a 9mm pistol. It has a 9mm size slide. It has a 9mm diameter barrel in it. It can't be converted to other calibers like 40 Smith & Wesson or 357 SIG or some as of yet uninvented DoD cartridge. It's a 9mm and it'll always be a 9mm. And it's not modular in that it doesn't have a chassis which can be removed and the grip frame replaced, as can be done with the P320 and can also be done with the Beretta APX. The Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 is also not modular in that respect. This is it does have a chassis, but it is literally molded into the frame, so it can't be changed out. Now, we can argue all day long about the utility of that modularity. That we all know, anybody who's been in the military knows that you're not going to go to an arms room to be issued a pistol and they're going to take measurements of your hand and they're going to put together a pistol that fits you exactly. That's just not going to happen. I think the modularity aspect of the contract was an effort to ensure the foregone conclusion that the P320 was going to be selected, because at the time, the Beretta APX hadn't been invented yet. And somebody at the DoD really wanted this contract to go to SIG. In my opinion, I don't know anything. That's just my feeling. And the fact that they rejected the APX out of hand, even though it performed perfectly well, and conformed to every single aspect of the contract because it was too new or it didn't have a track record, I think was because somebody wanted the contract to go to SIG. So this video is already extremely extremely long, but I'm not chopping it up into smaller segments. If you've watched this far, you can watch another 10 minutes or so, because I just want to give you my opinion of what should happen next. As I said, all of these pistols represent what could have been, and they also represent what could still be. What do I think is the most likely thing that's going to come out of this whole debacle if, in fact, the DoD throws the M17 and M18 in the dustbin where they probably belong? What do I think is the most likely course of events going forward? Well, the DoD could default back to what testing they did do, hopefully do a bit more testing, and select one of the original submissions. Again, I think most of the other submissions, with the exception possibly of the FN509, which would probably need to be reevaluated since it's not exactly the same as the FNS that was originally submitted. They could just default back to the original selection process and pick something that's already on the table. And I think these are the three most likely candidates. And again, it's quite likely that if they decide to go this route, they may dredge up a bunch of M9s out of reserve inventory and issue them at least temporarily, which if I was a service member, I wouldn't be too torn up about. Again, I love the M9. But which of these pistols, or maybe something else, is the most likely to become the M19, I suppose it would be? And I think it's already called the 19X. I think the most likely course of events, and it would be interesting to see the Glock 19 become the US M19. The most likely choice is for them to go back to the down select, pick their number 2, which I don't know if it should have been their number 1, but it should have been picked over the P320 in my opinion, and just go with the Glock 19X. That would be the most expedient thing to do. It would probably be the most economical thing to do, and it's probably what is most likely going to happen. I think the modularity requirements of the contract were kind of stupid to begin with. You don't need pistols with chassis that come out and you can swap and match parts, and you don't need to be able to convert to other cartridges. The 9x19 NATO is more popular than it's ever been. I don't see that changing anytime in the near future. The Army toyed around with going back to 45 ACP in 2007 and announced potential trials for that years ago, but that crashed and burned. I don't see us picking the 40 Smith & Wesson or the 357 SIG or some new cartridge that hasn't been invented yet. Handguns in military service are pretty much in the same role that they are with people like you and me. They're for self-defense purposes. And the 9mm does just fine. I would absolutely be in favor of them picking a different cartridge, a different loading of the 9mm, allowing expanding bullets on the modern battlefield would be nice. But I don't see the 9mm going anywhere anytime soon. And the Glock 19X is an excellent, excellent pistol. And I'm sure the soldiers would love it, and it would do just fine. Now, if I were in charge of the DoD and I was selecting a pistol to be the M19 based on my personal testing and experience, and I really haven't had a problem with any of these pistols, but I've been most impressed with the build and the performance of the Beretta APX. I think it's very unlikely that this will be the M19. I would love to see it become the M19, because if this was adopted as the U.S. military's next pistol, it would explode on the commercial market, and we would start seeing aftermarket parts that would improve this pistol where it is slightly deficient. There are plenty of interchangeable grip frames. This is an A0 grip frame in flat dark earth without finger grooves. I bought this online. It's made by Beretta. I like it a little bit better than the grip frame that was on the pistol when I got it, which had the finger grooves, although those finger grooves actually fit me fairly well, but I just prefer a pistol with a flat front strap. But I would love to see this pistol adopted because I would love to see what the Beretta APX could become if it was a commercial hit, which, again, it would be if it became the M19, the M19. I would love to see Apex make triggers for these and other aftermarket manufacturers. I'd love to see Wilson Combat or somebody else making new grip frames for these that might be slightly different, although ergonomically this one is very, very good. And I think that this pistol is by far the most soldier-proof pistol on this table. Just looking at it, feeling it, handling it, using it, I don't see how you would break this thing. The sights are steel. They are not night sights. They're just 3-dot sights, but they're far more robust than anything else on the table. The 19X and the M&P 2.0 both also have steel sights, which are night sights, and they're nice, decent, well-made sights, but they're not as monstrous as the ones on the Beretta APX. The Beretta APX is the heaviest pistol. It would be the most to tote around with you. And soldiers do care about weight. Ounces add up into pounds. Some folks might not like the weight of the pistol, but in general, pistols are not very heavy. It's not a really significant burden to carry a slightly heavier pistol than it is a slightly lighter pistol. But in my opinion, the APX would absolutely be the best choice from a standpoint of sheer indestructibility, which is not an inconsiderate factor to take into account when you're issuing gear, weapons or gear, to junior enlisted personnel. I would choose the Beretta APX, but I don't think that's going to happen. Which lastly brings us to the Smith Wesson M&P. I think, and I haven't had this pistol very long, I haven't had a chance to really wring it out yet. I think the M&P is the best pistol of the 3 polymer-framed pistols on the table at being a pistol. It has the best trigger. It has very nice sights. It's very nice ergonomically. It has an all-steel magazine release. The Beretta APX has a steel mag release, but it has a plastic button on the side, which I don't know that that's a problem, but I like the fact that the Smith & Wesson M&P magazine release is all steel. I think it's ergonomically superior to either of the other 2 pistols. I'm not sure, and it would make an excellent choice as well as the new M19. I'm just not sure that that's going to happen. But really, at the end of the day, I think any of these 3 pistols would be a perfectly acceptable choice as the M19. But I think the Glock 19X is probably the most likely choice, and I don't have a problem with that. It's certainly a bit lighter. It's plenty soldier-proof, although it's not as massively built as the APX or the M&P 2.0, but it is lightweight. Ounces add up into pounds. Soldiers would like that. It's relatively slim compared to the other 2 pistols. If you're carrying the pistol in a side holster and you're going in and out of armored vehicles and through doorways, it's much less likely to get smashed into stuff. And it's absolutely up to the task. So this video is damn near an hour long at this point, and for that I apologize. I'm not going to edit it down. I wanted to say all of the things that I said here. I actually wanted to say a bunch of stuff I didn't say, but I'm not going to go back and rehash. In my opinion, the Glock 19X will most likely, assuming that SIG doesn't get the problems with the P320 worked out, and assuming that the DoD does the right thing and ditches the P320, I think that this thing is almost certainly a shoe-in as the new M19. And if it is, when that happens, I will certainly make another video about it. I'll be happy to make more extensive videos about any of the pistols on this table. I owe one certainly on this M9 because that's about as close to a military M9 as you can get. I bought this about 15 years ago, and it was made in Accokeek, Maryland on the original production line. It was, of course, a commercial M9, but I retrofitted it with all of the steel parts. It's got cage codes on the hammer and all of that. It's really cool. I'd love to talk about this. I haven't really had a chance to evaluate the M&P in extremely deep depth, but I will certainly be doing a video about that in the future. And I'm not sure if I've covered the 19X before. I know it's been on the channel before, but I will certainly be happy to do that as well if anyone's interested. When I do that, I hope to see each of you here then. Later, guys.